I never imagined that Lumen Innovations' annual holiday gala at the prestigious Azura Skyline Hotel would end with me holding a champagne tray one minute and standing on stage as the newly announced CEO the next, while Dominic Thorne, my supervisor of 3 years, nearly collapsed from shock. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Even less could I have anticipated the look of absolute horror on Priya Vega's impeccably made-up face when her elaborate scheme to sabotage my acquisition of the company unraveled in front of Seattle's entire tech elite. The woman who had spent years deliberately undermining my contributions suddenly realized that every demeaning task, every stolen idea, and every calculated exclusion had actually been meticulously documented in what would become the company's most groundbreaking case study on workplace toxicity. But that moment, when Garrett Kincaid, the retiring founder, placed the ceremonial company key in my palm instead of in Priya's waiting hands, became the catalyst that not only secured my professional future, but transformed me from the brilliant but invisible backend developer into the visionary leader who would revolutionize how technology serves underrepresented communities. Most people at Lumen Innovations knew me as Zara Ellis, the quiet coding genius who somehow always got stuck with administrative tasks despite having built half the company's award-winning security protocols. What they didn't know, what Priya and her executive clique had carefully hidden, was that I was actually Zareen Ellis-Kincaid, estranged niece of founder Garrett Kincaid and the architect behind Lumen's most profitable innovations. My journey at Lumen began 3 years ago, after completing my dual masters in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence at MIT. Most graduates with my credentials would have walked straight into executive positions at any tech company in the country. But I had different plans that my uncle Garrett fully supported, even if they required temporary secrecy. "You're sure about this approach, Zareen?" Garrett had asked during our private dinner the night before my first day. "You could start as innovation director like we discussed originally. No one would question it." I stirred my coffee thoughtfully, already dressed in the deliberately understated outfit I'd chosen for my first day. The only way to truly understand how Lumen operates is to experience it from the ground up, especially with you retiring soon. I need to see who thrives, who struggles, and who creates barriers rather than solutions. Especially since the acquisition, reports show concerning patterns in the culture. Garrett nodded, the worry lines around his eyes deepening. Priya Vega and her team have delivered impressive quarterly results, but the employee turnover in certain departments troubles me. I built Lumen to be innovative, not extractive. "That's exactly why this approach makes sense," I replied. "If I'm going to potentially take over, I need to witness the company's reality, not just what executives want us to see during boardroom presentations." And so began my carefully orchestrated undercover journey, officially hired as a mid-level developer reporting to Dominic Thorne, who reported directly to Priya. On paper, I was a promising but unremarkable new hire. In reality, I was conducting the most comprehensive cultural audit in Lumen's history, with only Garrett and his trusted legal counsel, Maya Winters, aware of my true identity and purpose. The patterns emerged almost immediately. Despite consistently delivering exceptional code and innovative solutions, my contributions were systematically minimized or outright claimed by others, particularly by Dominic and his favorite team members. Critical meetings would be, accidentally, scheduled during my pre-approved lunch breaks. Documentation of my work would mysteriously disappear from shared drives, only to reappear in presentations given by Priya's inner circle. "Sorry, Zara, we need someone to take notes during the Archer client meeting," Dominic would say, despite my having written the security protocol the client was implementing. "Trent will present the technical aspects. He's more seasoned with client interactions." Trent Blackwell, who had joined 6 months after me but somehow had been promoted twice while my advancement opportunities mysteriously evaporated, would smirk as he collected my meticulously prepared technical diagrams. Hours later, he would present my work as his own while I silently documented every word, every slide, every stolen credit. The most revealing patterns emerged around Priya Vega herself. As Chief Operating Officer, she had positioned loyal friends in key roles throughout the company, creating an ecosystem where genuine innovation was less valued than loyalty to her vision. Those who challenged her, even with data-driven insights, found themselves marginalized or managing increasingly irrelevant projects. "We need team players at Lumen," she would announce during all-hands meetings, her gaze lingering meaningfully on anyone who had recently questioned her decisions. "People who understand that success comes from alignment, not disruption." The IEB calculated irony of a tech company discouraging disruption wasn't lost on me or on the talented developers who found their groundbreaking ideas repeatedly shelved in favor of safer, more marketable options that would boost quarterly numbers while sacrificing long-term innovation. During my second year, I created an experimental algorithm that could dramatically improve accessibility features for users with disabilities, a market Lumen had consistently overlooked despite its growth potential. The project, developed during company-sanctioned innovation time, showed promising early results. "This is brilliant work, Zara," admitted Dominic during my project review, genuine admiration briefly breaking through his usual condescension. "Let me share this with Priya's team. This could be huge for us." 2 weeks later, the project was officially shelved due to resource constraints and market uncertainty. 3 months after that, I discovered that key components of my algorithm had been integrated into Priya's pet project, Lumen Elixir, a premium service targeting high-net-worth clients that had nothing to do with accessibility. When I discreetly raised concerns about the ethical implications with HR, I was quickly reassigned to the legacy systems maintenance team, a well-known corporate backwater where challenging projects and promising careers went to die. "You should be grateful," Dominic informed me with transparent insincerity. "Many developers would love the stability of working on established systems. Not everyone thrives under the pressure of innovation teams." The systematic sidelining accelerated after that. My meeting invitations dwindled. My project suggestions were rejected without review. My performance evaluations, once glowing, became suddenly satisfactory, despite no change in my output quality or quantity. What Priya and Dominic didn't realize was that every slight, every stolen idea, every retaliatory reassignment was being meticulously documented, not just by me, but through a special administrative access that Garrett had quietly maintained. Every deleted email, every modified document, every backdated performance review existed in duplicate on a secure server that only Garrett and I could access. The surveillance wasn't just about building a case against toxic leadership. It was about understanding how systemic exclusion operated at Lumen. Knowledge I would need if I were to dismantle these patterns after taking control. The Holiday Gala, traditionally Lumen's most lavish annual event, was supposed to be Priya's coronation. Industry rumors had been circulating for months that Garrett would finally announce his successor, and Priya had been not so subtly positioning herself as the obvious choice. She had even given interviews to tech publications hinting at her upcoming expanded role and the exciting new direction she would take Lumen. I arrived at the Zara Skyline Hotel's grand ballroom early, having been volunteered by Dominic to help with setup. The space was spectacular, soaring glass ceilings revealing Seattle's glittering skyline, elaborate ice sculptures depicting Lumen's most successful products, gourmet food stations stretching along one entire wall. "Zara, perfect timing," called Dominic, waving me over to where he stood with Priya and several executives. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps, finally, I would be acknowledged for my contributions. That hope evaporated instantly as he continued. "We're short-staffed on service personnel, and we need someone familiar with the team to circulate with champagne during the announcement ceremony. You'll be perfect since you know everyone's names." Priya smirked, adjusting her custom-designed emerald gown that probably cost more than my annual salary. "Unless that's too beneath your considerable talents." The challenge in her voice was clear: refuse and confirm her narrative that I wasn't a team player. "Happy to help," I replied with practiced pleasantness, noting how Trent snickered behind his hand. "Whatever makes the event successful." As I accepted the serving tray and began arranging champagne flutes, I caught Garrett watching from across the room, his expression unreadable. We had barely spoken in public during my 3 years at Lumen, maintaining the fiction that I was just another employee. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Our real communication happened through encrypted messages and occasional weekend meetings at his remote lake house, where I provided comprehensive reports on company operations. "Tonight changes everything," he had texted earlier that day. "Be prepared." I assumed he meant be prepared for Priya's promotion and the corporate restructuring that would inevitably follow, changes we had been strategizing how to mitigate once I formally joined the board next quarter. I had no idea how literal his warning would prove to be. The evening progressed predictably at first. Executives mingled with major clients. Mid-level managers like Dominic oscillated between fawning over their superiors and ignoring their subordinates. I circulated with my champagne tray, invisible except when serving drinks, collecting fragments of unguarded conversations as people spoke freely in front of someone they perceived as non-threatening staff. "Priya's already started interviewing candidates for her current position," confided one director to another near the dessert station. "Apparently she's bringing in her former colleague from Vertex Systems." "Smart move," replied her companion. "Better to have your own people in place before making bigger changes." I heard the development team is getting completely restructured in Q1. I filed away this information, noting how none of these planned changes had been shared with the actual development teams whose livelihoods would be affected. This pattern of excluding those most impacted from decisions about their work was exactly what I planned to change. At precisely 9:30, Garrett took the stage. At 68, my uncle remained an imposing figure, tall, sharp-eyed, with a gravitas that commanded attention without demanding it. The room quieted immediately. For 30 years, Lumen Innovations has strived to create technology that illuminates possibilities, he began, his voice steady and measured. "We've had successes and failures. We've grown and adapted. But throughout it all, one principle has remained consistent: the belief that how we build is as important as what we build." From my position near the back wall, still holding my half-empty champagne tray, I watched Priya position herself strategically at the edge of the stage, her expression one of practiced, humble anticipation. "Leadership is not about title or authority," Garrett continued. "It's about vision, integrity, and recognizing potential where others see only limitations." Priya nodded emphatically, clearly believing these words were an endorsement of her approach. "The future of Lumen requires a leader who understands our company not just from the executive suite, but from every level. Someone who has experienced firsthand both our strengths and our weaknesses." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. This didn't sound like the expected announcement. "Which is why, for the past 3 years, my successor has been working throughout our organization, learning our processes, identifying barriers to innovation, and experiencing our culture as an ordinary employee would." The murmur grew louder. Priya's confident smile faltered slightly as Garrett reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box containing the ceremonial key to Lumen headquarters, a tradition dating back to the company's founding. "It's my great honor to announce that effective January 1st, Lumen Innovations will be led by someone who has proven her exceptional technical brilliance, ethical leadership, and unwavering commitment to our core mission." Time seemed to slow. as Garrett's eyes found mine at the back of the room. "Zareen Ellis-Kincaid, would you please join me on stage?" The silence that followed was absolute. Hundreds of eyes turned, searching for this unfamiliar name, this person they'd never heard of despite presumably working with her. Carefully, I set down my champagne tray on a nearby table. As I made my way through the stunned crowd, I heard the whispers start. "Who? Ellis. Wait, Zara Ellis? The backend developer? Kincaid? Is she related to—" Dominic's face drained of color as I passed him. Trent's jaw literally dropped. And Priya. Priya looked as though she'd been suddenly drenched in ice water, her carefully constructed reality dissolving before her eyes. As I took my place beside Garrett on stage, he smiled warmly and addressed the confused audience. "Many of you know her as Zara Ellis, a talented but perhaps underutilized member of our development team. Tonight, I'm proud to introduce you to Zareen Ellis-Kincaid, my niece, MIT's most decorated graduate in their dual cybersecurity and AI programs history, and the architect behind several of Lumen's most innovative security protocols of the past 3 years." He turned to face me directly, offering the velvet box, protocols for which others often received credit. The pointed statement hung in the air as I accepted the symbolic key. Shocked whispers crescendoed throughout the ballroom. From my new vantage point on stage, I could see Dominic frantically scrolling through his phone, likely searching for any connection between Zara Ellis and the Kincaid family he might have missed during my hiring. "Thank you, Garrett," I said, finally able to address my uncle by name in this setting. I turned to face the company I would soon lead. "I recognize this comes as a surprise to most of you. That was intentional." I paused, making brief eye contact with developers whose brilliant ideas I had seen suppressed, with qualified women who had been passed over for promotions, with ethical employees who had been sidelined for questioning dubious decisions. True, innovation can't thrive where fear, favoritism, and credit stealing are normalized. Over the past 3 years, I've witnessed extraordinary talent being wasted because of arbitrary hierarchies and exclusive inner circles. Near the stage, Priya's expression morphed from shock to calculated damage control. I could almost see her formulating explanations, justifications, ways to position herself as an ally rather than an obstacle. "Some might call my approach deceptive," I continued. "I consider it necessary due diligence. Leadership isn't about the corner office or speaking the loudest in meetings. It's about understanding challenges at every level and recognizing potential that others deliberately overlook." Murmurs of agreement rose from various corners of the room, particularly from those who had experienced the toxic aspects of Lumen's culture firsthand. Starting January 1st, Lumen will undergo significant changes, not just in leadership, but in how we operate, how we recognize contributions, and how we define success. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment and the responsibility I was accepting. For those who have thrived by taking credit for others' work, by creating exclusionary power structures, or by prioritizing personal advancement over company mission, changes are coming that you may find uncomfortable. My gaze found Priya, whose frozen smile now looked more like a grimace. For those whose innovations have been sidelined, whose concerns have been dismissed, whose talents have been minimized, I see you. I've been you. And together, we're going to build a version of Lumen that values substance over spectacle and collaboration over competition. The applause began gradually, first from a table of junior developers who had suffered under Dominic's management, then spreading to other departments that had been marginalized under the current regime. Within moments, it had grown into a standing ovation from the majority of the room, though notably not from Priya's inner circle, who remained seated, expressions calculating. As the evening transitioned into more informal celebrations, I was approached by employees from every level of the company, many offering congratulations, others bravely sharing stories of obstacles they'd faced, and quite a few expressing vindication at the night's unexpected turn. Maya Winters, Garrett's trusted legal counsel and one of the few people who had known my true identity, appeared at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. "Quite the dramatic revelation," she observed, handing me one. "Though I suspect the real drama is just beginning. Priya's already huddled with her lieutenants in the corner, and she's made 3 calls in the past 20 minutes. I sipped my champagne, watching Priya's animated conversation with several board members. "Let me guess. She's suggesting that my appointment represents nepotism rather than merit, questioning whether someone so junior can possibly lead effectively, and hinting that my deception indicates questionable character." Maya's eyebrows rose. "Almost word for word. You've studied her well." "I've had 3 years to learn her playbook," I replied, "which is precisely why her usual tactics won't work anymore." She still has allies on the board and relationships with major clients," Maya cautioned. "This won't be a smooth transition." "I'm counting on it," I said, watching as Dominic awkwardly approached, his expression a strained attempt at collegial warmth that had never once appeared during our 3 years working together. Ms. Kincaid, wonderful surprise," he stammered, extending his hand. "I always knew you had exceptional potential. In fact, I was just telling Trent recently that we should consider you for the advanced projects team." Maya excused herself with a knowing smile as I faced the man who had systematically undermined me at every opportunity. "That's fascinating, Dominic, especially since my performance review last month specifically stated I lacked the technical depth for advanced project work and recommended I focus on mastering basic documentation skills." His face flushed. "There must be some confusion. Perhaps HR mixed up the forms. I've always been your biggest advocate." "Fortunately, we have extensive records to refresh everyone's memory," I replied pleasantly, "including the original. Drafts of reviews before they were altered, emails discussing how to minimize my contributions, and documented instances of my work being reassigned to others." The color drained from his face. "I was only following established protocols for talent development. Priya has very specific expectations for how team members should be managed." And there it was, the immediate deflection of responsibility, the suggestion that toxic behavior was simply following orders rather than a personal choice. "We'll have plenty of time to discuss management approaches in the coming weeks," I assured him. "I'm implementing comprehensive leadership assessments for all management positions starting January 5th. As Dominic retreated, looking queasy, I caught sight of Priya making her way determinedly in my direction, her expression professionally pleasant, but her eyes cold with calculation. The real battle for Lumen's future was just beginning, but unlike the past 3 years, I would no longer be fighting from the shadows. I touched the small thumb drive in my pocket, containing irrefutable documentation of every ethical breach, every instance of discrimination, every suppressed innovation that had occurred under current leadership. I had come to Lumen to understand its flaws before attempting to fix them. Now it was time to transform understanding into action, starting with dismantling the very power structures that had tried so hard to keep me serving drinks instead of shaping the company's future. As Priya approached with her practiced corporate smile, I squared my shoulders and prepared for the first public confrontation of many to come. The invisible developer holding a champagne tray had vanished forever. In her place stood the leader, who would rebuild Lumen from the inside out, no matter who tried to stand in the way. The morning after the gala, I arrived at Lumen headquarters just after sunrise. The building stood quiet and nearly empty, a stark contrast to the chaos that would undoubtedly erupt once the workday officially began. This early arrival wasn't new for me. I'd spent countless mornings working in solitude while those in Priya's circle arrived fashionably late, secure in the knowledge that different standards applied to them. But today was different. Today I walked past the security desk with a nod. From Marcus, the head of building security, who had always treated me with respect despite my seemingly junior position. "Morning, Ms. Kincaid," he said, using my full surname for the first time. "Congratulations on the announcement." "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, appreciating his genuine smile. "And it's still just Zareen." "Yes, ma'am," he answered with a knowing look that suggested he understood the significance of the moment. "Mr. Kincaid arrived about 20 minutes ago. He's waiting in your new office." My new office. The executive suite that had remained unused since Garrett had shifted to a flexible work arrangement 2 years earlier. I'd never even been inside it despite my hidden connection to the company's founder. The executive floor felt like foreign territory as I stepped off the elevator. Plush carpeting replaced the industrial flooring of the development floors. Actual artwork hung on walls instead of motivational posters. The lighting was softer, more natural, without the harsh fluorescence that gave developers headaches during late-night coding sessions. Garrett stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's awakening skyline, a cup of his preferred black coffee in hand. He turned as I entered, his expression shifting from contemplation to quiet pride. "I wondered if you'd come in early," he said by way of greeting. "You always did prefer to prepare thoroughly before battles." "And this will definitely be a battle," I replied, setting my laptop bag on the expansive desk that would soon be mine. Priya made 5 calls to board members before leaving the gala last night. "She's already building a coalition against me." Garrett nodded, unsurprised. "Julian Mercer called me at 11 p.m. to express his concerns about the transition. Apparently, I've allowed personal sentiment to override business judgment by appointing my inexperienced niece." Julian was Priya's first hire when she joined Lumen, I noted. He's been her strongest ally on the board. "Along with Deirdre Shawcross and Martin Chen," Garrett added. "They've requested an emergency board meeting this afternoon to discuss the transition process. Essentially, they want to review my decision and potentially add constraints to your authority." I moved to the coffee station in the corner of the office, preparing a cup while organizing my thoughts. "They can't overturn your decision entirely. The company bylaws give you successor naming rights as the founder. They can make your job nearly impossible if we don't handle this carefully," Garrett warned. "Priya has spent years cultivating relationships with these people. They trust her vision for Lumen, which essentially means maximizing short-term profits and maintaining their comfortable positions." I turned, leaning against the credenza. "While I represent uncertainty and potential disruption to the status quo." "Precisely." Garrett gestured to a sleek portfolio on the desk. Maya prepared briefing documents on each board member, their history with the company, investment positions, voting patterns, and personal concerns. "She'll meet us here at 8 to finalize strategy for the meeting." I picked up the portfolio, flipping through the meticulously prepared profiles. "We need to move quickly. Priya will use the transition period to entrench her allies and potentially sabotage key initiatives." Garrett's expression grew serious. "She's already tried. Security protocols flagged unusual download activity at 2 a.m. Someone using Priya's credentials accessed several confidential project files, including your accessibility algorithm and the Nexus protocol documents." The Nexus protocol was Lumen's most promising development, a revolutionary security framework I had designed that could transform how vulnerable populations protected their digital identities. It had been deliberately kept separate from Priya's division after I discovered how she had repurposed my previous work. Trying to claim she was already developing similar technology when I announced the official project, I mused, seeing her strategy clearly. "We need to lock down all sensitive IP immediately." "Already done," Garrett assured me. Maya implemented the contingency protocols we established last year. All critical project data now requires dual authorization for access or transfer. I nodded, grateful for the foresight we'd shown in preparing for this moment. "And the security. Recordings from last night?" "Preserved with blockchain verification," he confirmed. Her first misstep, trying to access those files. It demonstrates intent that will be valuable if this becomes a legal battle. The next 3 hours passed in focused preparation. Maya arrived with additional legal documents and contingency plans. By 9 o'clock, we had developed a comprehensive strategy for both the emergency board meeting and the broader transition. Throughout, I maintained my secure connection to the development team's messaging platform, observing as employees began arriving and the inevitable rumors spread. Dominic was the first to attempt damage control with his team. His message to the development group chat projected artificial enthusiasm. Exciting changes ahead, team. I've always believed in Ms. Ellis's potential, which is why I've been mentoring her capabilities. Looking forward to continuing our collaborative relationship as she steps into her new role. Please direct any questions or concerns to me as we navigate this transition together. Several developers responded with thinly veiled skepticism. Weird, I remember you saying last month that Zara lacked strategic thinking skills. So, all those times you assigned her to take notes in meetings while Trent presented her work was mentorship. Does this mean her accessibility project might get resurrected now? The one you told her wasn't commercially viable? Dominic's attempts to answer these pointed questions only dug him deeper into obvious contradictions. Meanwhile, Priya maintained public silence while clearly working behind the scenes. Calendar invitations began appearing for strategic alignment meetings that included her allies but excluded anyone known to have expressed criticism of her leadership approach. At 10:30, I received notification that Priya had called an all-hands meeting for 11 a.m., a meeting to which I had conspicuously not been invited. Rather than challenge this transparent attempt to shape the narrative without me present, I decided to observe how she would position herself. Through a secure connection established long ago, I watched the live stream from my new office as Priya took the stage in the company's main auditorium. Her expression conveyed professional concern as she addressed the assembled employees. By now, you've all heard about the surprise announcement at last night's gala, she began, her voice measured and authoritative. While this transition was unexpected, I want to assure everyone that senior leadership is working closely with the board to ensure stability during this period. The careful phrasing, emphasizing senior leadership working with the board, rather than working with me, sent a clear message about where she believed actual authority resided. Zareen Ellis-Kincaid has tremendous technical knowledge, Priya continued with calculated precision, and we look forward to supporting her growth into this challenging role. As we all know, technical brilliance doesn't always translate to executive leadership, which is why experienced guidance will be essential during this transition. The condescension was masterfully delivered, acknowledging my technical skills while implying incompetence in leadership, all couched in supportive language. I watched as she smoothly positioned herself as the mature, steady hand who would guide the naive newcomer, and, by extension, retain actual control. I've already spoken with several major clients who expressed concerns about continuity of service, she continued, failing to mention that she was likely the one who had created those concerns through her framing of the situation. I've personally assured them that our operational standards will not change and that our strategic direction remains consistent. Translation: I've told clients to trust only me and that nothing the new CEO implements will actually affect our established approach. Most fascinating was watching the audience reactions caught by the cameras. Senior managers and Priya's allies nodded along, their expressions appropriately solemn. But among the rank-and-file employees, particularly in the development and design teams that had suffered most under the current leadership, I could see flickers of hope, skepticism, and in some cases, poorly concealed satisfaction at this disruption to the power structure. After 20 minutes of skillful narrative control, Priya opened the floor for a carefully moderated Q&A session. The first several questions came from her obvious allies, lobbing softballs that allowed her to reinforce her message of experience, stability, and implied superior qualification. Then Mira Okafor, a brilliant developer who had been repeatedly passed over for promotion, despite creating two of Lumen's most successful products, raised her hand. Priya clearly hesitated before acknowledging her. "You mentioned ensuring continuity," Mira began, her voice clear and steady despite the tension visible in her posture. "But many of us are actually hoping for meaningful change in how projects are evaluated, how credit is assigned, and how promotion decisions are made. Will the current leadership team be reviewing these processes as part of the transition?" A ripple of murmured agreement spread through the technical teams. Priya's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you for that thoughtful question, Mira. Of course, we continually evaluate all our processes for effectiveness. That said, Lumen's success speaks for itself. Our current evaluation and advancement systems have helped us become an industry leader. While we always welcome constructive feedback, wholesale changes to proven systems would be potentially destabilizing and aren't currently planned." The dismissal was polite, but absolute. Nothing would change, at least not if Priya had her way. I'd seen enough. It was time to disrupt the carefully choreographed performance. I sent a message to the technical director handling the meeting's audiovisual elements, Raj Patel, who had personally experienced Priya's credit stealing and had documented it meticulously, in confidential emails to HR that had mysteriously disappeared from the system. "Raj, this is Zareen. Please activate my video feed on the main screen. Authorization code GKZK7293. Seconds later, my live image appeared on the massive screen behind Priya, who was still fielding carefully selected questions. The auditorium fell silent as people noticed my presence. Priya turned, momentarily, startled before composing herself. "Ah, Zareen, how nice of you to join us. We were just discussing transition plans." "So I heard," I replied, my calm voice filling the room through the sound system. "Though I'm surprised to learn about these detailed continuity assurances and strategic commitments, considering we haven't yet had our first transition meeting." Priya's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "I was simply addressing immediate concerns based on my experience with our client relationships." "I appreciate your initiative," I said pleasantly, matching her professional tone while sending a different message. "Since we're all together, this seems like an excellent opportunity to address the company directly about initial priorities and to clarify some apparent misunderstandings." Without waiting for her response, I continued, now speaking directly to the assembled employees. "First, let me be clear. This transition represents significant change, not continuity. Lumen was founded on principles of innovation, ethical technology development, and creating tools that empower rather than exploit users. Over time, some of these principles have been subordinated to short-term market considerations. That ends now." I could see Priya calculating whether interrupting would make her appear defensive or authoritative. She chose to maintain her composed expression while stepping slightly to the side, unwilling to appear diminished but unable to stop what was happening. Second, regarding concerns about leadership experience. While I've been positioned as a junior developer for the past 3 years, my actual background includes founding 2 successful security startups that were acquired before I joined Lumen, serving as technical advisor to 3 Fortune 500 companies, and completing executive leadership training at both MIT and Stanford. My inexperience has been greatly exaggerated. This information clearly surprised many in the room, including several who had treated me dismissively based on Priya and Dominic's characterization of my background. Finally, to address Mira's excellent question directly. Yes, we will be comprehensively reviewing how ideas are evaluated, how credit is assigned, and how advancement decisions are made. In fact, beginning next week, we'll implement project attribution protocols that track contributions transparently, and will establish an anonymous reporting system for instances where credit has been misappropriated. The energy in the room shifted palpably. Among the technical teams especially, expressions of cautious hope appeared. Priya's supporters, however, exchanged concerned glances. Thank you for organizing this meeting, Priya. I concluded with professional courtesy. I look forward to seeing everyone at tomorrow's official transition announcement, where I'll outline our revised strategic priorities and organizational changes in detail. Until then, please direct any transition questions to me directly rather than through intermediate channels. The message was clear. I was taking control of the narrative immediately, not allowing Priya to continue positioning herself as the de facto authority. As my video feed ended, the camera caught Priya's expression, a mixture of frustration and calculation as she realized her attempt to establish dominance had been effectively countered. By early afternoon, battle lines had been clearly drawn. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. Maya's intelligence suggested that Priya had secured tentative support from 4 of the 9 board members, with 2 others undecided. She would need 6 votes to impose any meaningful constraints on my authority. She'll focus on 3 main arguments, Maya predicted as we finalized our strategy. Your alleged inexperience, the disruption to client relationships, and the claim that this was an emotional decision by Garrett rather than a strategic one. And she'll imply, though never state directly, that my appointment represents nepotism rather than merit, I added, reviewing the board member profiles once more. Which makes our documentation of her actual performance versus my suppressed contributions particularly relevant. Garrett nodded grimly. Julian Mercer is her strongest ally on the board, but he's also the most vulnerable if certain information becomes public. Be prepared for him to lead the opposition. Julian Mercer had been instrumental in helping Priya secure her position at Lumen 5 years earlier. What most board members didn't know was that Julian had also received substantial consulting fees from Elixir Partners, a venture capital firm where Priya had worked previously. Payments that continued after she joined Lumen and influenced several major vendor contracts in Elixir's favor. At precisely 3 p.m., we entered the boardroom. The atmosphere was charged with tension barely concealed beneath professional courtesy. Priya sat flanked by her strongest supporters, Julian Mercer and Deirdre Shawcross, with Martin Chen positioned strategically across from them. The remaining board members maintained neutral expressions, though I noted that Patricia Nouri, one of our longest-serving directors, gave me a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Julian called the meeting to order with barely disguised impatience. We've convened this emergency session to address concerns regarding the leadership transition announced last night. While we respect Garrett's founder privileges under the corporate bylaws, several directors have expressed reservations about both the process and the selection. Priya maintained a concerned professional expression, the picture of a dedicated executive worried only about the company's welfare rather than her personal ambitions. Specifically, Julian continued, we need to evaluate whether Ms. Ellis-Kincaid possesses the necessary experience to assume full executive responsibilities immediately, or whether a phased transition with appropriate oversight would better serve Lumen's interests. Appropriate oversight, meaning Priya would maintain actual control while I served as a figurehead. Exactly the arrangement they had been positioning me for over the past 3 years without knowing my true identity. Garrett responded with the calm authority that had made him a respected leader for decades. I appreciate the board's diligence in examining this transition. However, I should clarify that this appointment isn't a sudden decision, but the culmination of a planned 3-year evaluation process. Zareen's role as an embedded executive has provided her with comprehensive understanding of our operations, culture, and challenges that no external candidate could possibly match. Julian frowned slightly. While that may be true, Garrett, there's a significant difference between observing operations and actually leading them. Priya has demonstrated exceptional leadership capabilities that have driven our market growth for 5 consecutive quarters. Shareholders expect continued stability and performance. At the mention of shareholders, I noticed Patricia Nouri's slight shift in posture. As our most financially focused director, she had consistently prioritized long-term value creation over quarterly performance. Speaking of shareholders, I interjected smoothly, opening the secure portfolio I had brought. I've prepared an analysis comparing our quarterly performance metrics with our long-term value indicators. While our stock price has indeed risen, under current leadership, our innovation pipeline has decreased by 37%, our patent applications have fallen by 42%, and our technical talent retention has dropped dramatically, particularly among women and underrepresented minorities. I distributed copies of the analysis to each board member. These trends suggest we're harvesting short-term gains at the expense of long-term innovation capacity, effectively consuming our seed corn. Patricia Nuri studied the documents with evident interest. These retention statistics are concerning. I wasn't aware we'd lost so many senior technical women over the past 2 years. That information wasn't included in the quarterly diversity reports, I explained. The reporting methodology was changed to focus on overall hiring numbers rather than retention by level, which masked the pattern. Priya leaned forward, her expression conveying professional concern. These selective statistics don't capture the complete picture of our talent strategy. We've been deliberately focusing on bringing in fresh perspectives rather than maintaining legacy approaches. Change inevitably creates some transition friction. Interesting characterization, I replied, maintaining a collegial tone while activating the room's presentation system. Let's look at who we've lost versus who we've retained. The screen displayed a visualization showing departed employees by technical contribution rating, patent generation, and innovation impact, metrics the company tracked internally but never consolidated into leadership reports. The data shows we've systematically lost high-performing innovators while retaining those less likely to challenge established approaches, I continued. Moreover, exit interviews, which were conducted but not circulated to the board, reveal a consistent pattern of concerns about credit appropriation, advancement barriers, and selective application of company policies. Martin Chen, another Priya ally, spoke up with evident skepticism. These are subjective perceptions from departing employees who likely have personal grievances. What matters are our market results, which have been exceptional. I nodded in acknowledgement. Market results absolutely matter. However, in technology, today's market results reflect innovation investments from 18 to 36 months ago. The innovation drought of the past 2 years won't affect quarterly numbers until next year and beyond, when it will be too late to correct course. Julian Mercer's expression hardened. This seems like an attempt to undermine Priya's established leadership record with speculative concerns about future performance. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to maintain proven leadership rather than experimenting with untested alternatives. The moment had arrived to shift from defense to offense. I turned to address Julian directly. Speaking of fiduciary responsibility, Mr. Mercer, I've been reviewing Lumen's vendor selection processes as part of my due diligence. I noticed some interesting patterns regarding contracts awarded to companies affiliated with Elixir partners. Julian's face remained impassive, but I detected a slight tension around his eyes. Vendor selections are made based on competitive bidding and capability assessments. Generally, yes, I agreed pleasantly. However, in 7 specific instances, over the past 3 years, vendors with Elixir connections were selected despite submitting neither the lowest bids nor demonstrating superior technical capabilities. Coincidentally, these decisions occurred after you received consulting payments from Elixir, totaling $840,000. The boardroom fell absolutely silent. Several directors looked between Julian and me with expressions ranging from shock to calculation. That's an outrageous implication, Julian stated, his voice carrying a warning edge. My consulting work is disclosed according to board requirements. The consulting relationship is indeed disclosed, I confirmed. The specific timing and amounts of payments correlated with vendor decisions, however, are not. Nor is the fact that several of these vendors subsequently hired Priya's former Elixir colleagues at substantially above-market compensation. I turned slightly to include the entire board in my gaze. I raise this not to make accusations, but to illustrate why comprehensive due diligence and independent oversight are essential during leadership transitions. My careful review has identified several governance concerns that require attention regardless of who serves as CEO. The strategic pivot worked exactly as planned. Rather than appearing defensive about my qualifications, I had shifted the conversation to governance weaknesses that implicated the very people questioning my readiness. More importantly, I had demonstrated precisely the type of rigorous oversight that several board members had privately worried might be lacking in Lumen's operations. Patricia Nouri, whose financial expertise made her highly respected among the other directors, cleared her throat. These vendor selection irregularities should be investigated immediately, regardless of their origin. Julian, perhaps you should recuse yourself from transition oversight given these potential conflicts. Julian's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Garrett skillfully redirected the conversation. I suggest we table the governance review for a dedicated session with our compliance team. Returning to the transition plan, I've prepared a detailed overview of Zareen's qualifications, her extensive leadership experience prior to joining Lumen, undercover, and the comprehensive assessment process that informed my succession decision. For the next 30 minutes, Garrett methodically dismantled the narrative that I was an inexperienced newcomer being elevated due to family connection. My previously confidential resume was revealed in full, including my successful startups, my advisory roles with major corporations, and my specialized training in corporate leadership. Most compelling were the documented instances where my innovations had created significant value for Lumen, despite being attributed to others. By the time he finished, the momentum had clearly shifted. Even Priya's strongest supporters on the board appeared less certain of their position. Martin Chen, always sensitive to changing political winds, began asking questions that suggested he was reconsidering his alignment. When Julian called for a vote on implementing transitional oversight measures that would have effectively limited my authority, the motion failed 7-2, with only Julian and Deirdre supporting it. Priya maintained her composed expression, but the slight tightening of her jaw revealed her recognition that the first major battle had been lost. As the meeting concluded, board members approached me individually, some offering genuine congratulations, others clearly reassessing their initial judgments, and a few making transparent attempts to establish themselves as potential allies despite their previous alignment with Priya. Patricia Nouri lingered until the others had departed. "That was impressively handled," she said quietly. "But Priya won't accept defeat easily. She's already contacting major clients to solidify her relationships as the stable, known quantity they should trust." "I'm counting on it," I replied. "Her predictable moves have been anticipated in our transition strategy." Patricia smiled slightly. "I've had concerns about certain patterns for some time but lacked sufficient evidence to raise them effectively. I look forward to a more transparent, operational approach." After she departed, only Priya remained, purposefully organizing her materials while clearly waiting for a private moment. When the room had emptied except for us, she approached with the polished professionalism that had served her so effectively throughout her career. "Impressive performance," she acknowledged, her tone suggesting professional respect, while her eyes remained calculatingly cold. "You've clearly prepared thoroughly for this moment." 3 years provides ample preparation. "Time," I replied evenly, "though I suspect you're already formulating counter-strategies." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "Business isn't personal, Zareen. I've built valuable relationships throughout this company and industry. Those relationships represent significant capital that shouldn't be casually discarded during this transition." The implication was clear. She was offering a potential alliance rather than continued opposition, an alliance where she would maintain her power base within the company while acknowledging my technical authority. "I agree completely that business isn't personal," I responded, "which is why performance and ethics, not relationships, will determine organizational structure moving forward." Her expression cooled further. You're making a consequential choice. Not everyone can transition successfully from technical contributor to organizational leader. The landscape is more complex than it appears from the development floor. I'm well aware of the complexity, I assured her, including the hidden complexities that don't appear in official reports or board presentations. Rest assured that every aspect of Lumen's operations will receive thorough review and appropriate restructuring. The professional veneer briefly slipped as genuine anger flashed across her features. Be careful about dismantling systems you don't fully understand. You may discover too late why certain arrangements exist. With that thinly veiled threat, she gathered her materials and departed, her posture rigid with controlled fury. I remained in the boardroom, contemplating the confrontations ahead. Priya's warning wasn't empty. She had indeed constructed elaborate systems of obligation, information control, and strategic dependency throughout the company. Dismantling those systems would trigger resistance not just from her direct allies, but from everyone who had adapted to the current power structure. Garrett and Maya rejoined me after confirming the board members had departed. Initial assessment? Garrett asked, already knowing I would have analyzed the meeting dynamics in detail. Better than expected, I replied. Julian overplayed his hand by pushing for formal oversight restrictions. Patricia's support shifted the neutral directors our way more quickly than anticipated. Maya nodded in agreement. The vendor connection revelation was particularly effective. Julian can't openly oppose you now without risking further scrutiny of those arrangements. Priya's already pivoting to a new strategy, I observed. She'll position herself as the experienced insider who can help me navigate leadership challenges, while actually working to maintain her power centers within the organization. Classic co-option approach, Garrett noted. When direct opposition fails, absorb and neutralize by appearing to support. I gathered my materials, mentally shifting to the next phase of our strategy. We have approximately 48 hours before she consolidates a new position. We need to implement the structural changes immediately, beginning with the department reorganization and the transparency protocols. Maya checked her secure tablet. The legal documents are prepared. We can begin implementation tonight, starting with the access permission resets and reporting structure changes. As we left the boardroom, I felt the weight of the challenges ahead. The boardroom confrontation had been merely the first skirmish in what would become a complex campaign to transform Lumen's culture and operations. Priya and her allies would resist at every turn, using their established relationships and institutional knowledge as weapons. But they were fighting to preserve a system designed for their benefit, while I was fighting to rebuild a company that could fulfill its original promise, creating technology that genuinely empowered people rather than simply generating profits for a privileged few. That fundamental difference in purpose would prove decisive in the battles to come. Walking through the executive floor toward my office, I passed the glass-walled conference room where Priya had already gathered her closest lieutenants, including Dominic and Trent. Their animated conversation halted abruptly as they noticed me passing. I nodded professionally, but didn't slow my pace. Let them strategize. Their playbook was already known to me after 3 years of careful observation. More importantly, they were constrained by needing to appear cooperative during the transition while actually working to undermine it, a contradiction that would inevitably create vulnerabilities I could exploit. In my office, I opened my laptop and initiated the secure protocol that would begin the most comprehensive corporate restructuring in Lumen's history. The first phase would target the information asymmetry that had allowed Priya's system to flourish. The carefully controlled access to data, the selective reporting, the hidden performance metrics that revealed the truth behind the polished quarterly presentations. By morning, that information ecosystem would be fundamentally altered. The privileged access paths would be reset, the shadow evaluation systems exposed, the actual contribution metrics made visible to those whose work had been systematically appropriated. And then the real transformation could begin. Dawn light, filtered through the windows of my temporary command center, a converted conference room adjacent to my official office where our transition team had worked through the night. Digital displays covered the walls, tracking the implementation of our restructuring protocols across Lumen systems. Maya dozed on the couch in the corner while Raj and his trusted security team monitored the technical aspects of our operation. "Final system migration complete," announced Kai Chen, one of our senior security architects who had been secretly documenting Priya's technical overreach for months. "All historical performance data has been restored to its original state before." "Selective editing?" I nodded, reviewing the comprehensive dashboard that now showed the actual contribution patterns across the company. The visualization revealed exactly what I had experienced personally: a systematic pattern of credit reassignment that diverted recognition from actual innovators to Priya's favored team members. "Permission structures?" I asked, moving to the next critical element of our plan. "Reconfigured according to actual roles rather than relationship networks," Raj confirmed. "We've implemented the transparent attribution system that tracks all changes to documents and code. No more mysterious disappearance of contribution records." For years, Priya had maintained power through controlling access, ensuring her allies could view and modify information that others couldn't see, even when those others were the original creators. That asymmetry ended tonight. What about the special access pathways? These were the hidden administrative routes that had allowed certain executives to monitor communications without detection, a capability that had given Priya crucial intelligence about potential opposition before it could organize. "Eliminated," Kai stated with evident satisfaction. "We've implemented the secure communication infrastructure you designed last year. All monitoring now requires formal authorization and creates auditable logs visible to the affected users." The final phase of our technical restructuring involved the most sensitive company data, the true financial arrangements behind Lumen's partnerships, vendor contracts, and client agreements. These documents revealed the complex web of personal incentives, hidden commissions, and reciprocal favors that constituted the shadow economy Priya had constructed beneath Lumen's official operations. "Financial transparency protocols?" I asked, turning to Imani Washington, our forensic accounting specialist who had been analyzing these patterns for months while officially working as a mid-level financial analyst. "Deployed and operational," she confirmed. "The comprehensive audit is running now. Initial findings show approximately $42 million in questionable transactions over the past 3 years, primarily flowing through the shell companies we identified earlier." I glanced at the time, 5:47 a.m. In just over 2 hours, employees would begin arriving, discovering a dramatically altered information landscape. The carefully maintained barriers that had protected Priya's system were now removed. The selective visibility that had allowed credit appropriation was replaced with transparent attribution. The hidden financial arrangements were exposed to formal review. "They'll respond immediately," I noted, thinking through the most likely counterattacks. "Priya will claim this restructuring threatens client confidentiality and operational security. Dominic will argue that changing access permissions creates project delays and undermines team cohesion. And Julian will convene another emergency board meeting citing reckless disruption of established systems," Maya added, fully awake now and joining our strategy discussion. "We've prepared responses to each objection that frame the changes as necessary compliance and security measures rather than punitive actions." I nodded, appreciating once again the meticulous preparation that had gone into this moment. For 3 years, I had documented every instance of system manipulation, every case of contribution theft, every example of retaliatory reassignment. That documentation now served as bulletproof justification for each change we implemented. What about the client relationships? This represented Priya's strongest remaining leverage. She had carefully personalized key client connections, positioning herself as the essential relationship manager whose departure would threaten million-dollar contracts. Emergency client briefings are scheduled beginning at 9 a.m., Maya confirmed. We've prepared specialized presentations for each major client that emphasize continuity of their specific projects while highlighting the enhanced security and innovation benefits of our restructured systems. As the team continued finalizing preparations, I stepped away briefly, moving to the windows that overlooked the Seattle skyline, now brightening with morning light. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of the transformation we were initiating. Changing systems was challenging enough. Changing entrenched culture would be far more difficult. In a few hours, hundreds of employees would discover that the power dynamics they had adapted to, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes cynically, had fundamentally shifted. Some would feel vindication, others disorientation, and those who had benefited from the previous arrangements would experience genuine fear about their positions. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unlisted number, a special channel established for confidential communications from employees who had secretly supported my assessment mission over the past 3 years. The message was from Dr. Eliza Kwan, head of Lumen's AI Ethics Division, who had been systematically sidelined after raising concerns about privacy implications in several of Priya's priority projects. Unusual activity in the executive wing at 5 a.m. Priya and team arrived with external IT consultants. They appear to be attempting system access from isolated terminals. The counteroffensive had begun earlier than expected. Priya was trying to establish alternative access channels before discovering her primary pathways had been reconfigured. I immediately returned to the command center. Priya's on-site with external technical resources, likely attempting to preserve access through independent channels. Raj nodded without surprise. We detected the unauthorized connection attempts. Their external devices can't authenticate through our new security protocols. They'll escalate to physical document retrieval then, I predicted. Check the executive document room and secure storage facilities. Kai turned to his monitoring systems, confirming my suspicion moments later. Security cameras showed Dominic and 2 assistants accessing the executive document archive. They've removed several storage containers. Implement Protocol Phoenix, I directed, referring to our contingency plan for exactly this scenario. The containment effort had multiple components: digital evidence preservation, physical access management, and legal documentation of any attempted information removal. Maya immediately initiated the legal aspects, contacting our outside counsel, who had been on standby for this possibility. Raj's team activated specialized monitoring to track any attempt to remove or transmit confidential information. Most importantly, our security team deployed to key access points, ensuring that physical documents couldn't leave the building without proper authorization. By 7:30 a.m., the situation had escalated into open confrontation. Priya, discovering her access credentials no longer functioned as expected, had attempted to invoke emergency override protocols, only to find those had been reconfigured as well. Her team's efforts to download critical files were blocked by the new permission structures. Their attempt to remove physical documents was intercepted by security, who politely but firmly explained the enhanced documentation requirements for removing company materials. Rather than accepting these new constraints, Priya made a critical misstep. She contacted Julian Mercer directly, who then called the head of building security, demanding that Priya's team be granted their usual access privileges by order of the board. This overreach triggered our prepared response. Maya immediately sent formal legal notification to all board members regarding potential governance violations, specifically citing the prohibition against individual directors attempting to override established security protocols without formal board action. By 8 a.m., when general employees began arriving, the executive floor had transformed into a tense standoff. Priya and her team, frustrated in their attempts to preserve privileged access, had retreated to the executive conference room where they were presumably planning their next move. Our transition team maintained control of key systems and access points while continuing the systematic restructuring of Lumen's operations. At precisely 9 a.m., I convened the company-wide meeting that had been scheduled the previous day. Unlike Priya's selective all-hands gathering, this one included every employee at every level, with mandatory attendance either in person or via secure video conference. As I took the stage in the main auditorium, I could feel the contrasting energies in the room. Anticipation from those who had suffered under the previous regime, concern from those uncertain about their position in the new order, and barely concealed hostility from Priya's inner circle, who sat together in pointed solidarity. "Good morning," I began, surveying the assembled company. "First, thank you for your patience during this unexpected transition. I recognize that sudden change creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates anxiety. Today, I want to provide clarity about what is changing at Lumen, what remains the same, and most importantly, why these changes are essential to our collective future." Rather than standing behind the podium as executives traditionally did, I moved to the center of the stage, creating a more direct connection with the audience. When my uncle founded Lumen Innovations 28 years ago, he had a clear vision: technology that empowers rather than exploits, systems that enhance human capability rather than replace human judgment, and a company culture where excellence is recognized regardless of title or connection. I paused, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. Over time, aspects of that vision became compromised. Not through any single decision, but through a gradual shift in priorities and practices. Innovation became subordinated to quarterly results. Recognition became tied to relationships rather than contributions. And information, the lifeblood of any technology company, became increasingly controlled by a select few rather than accessible to all who needed it. In the front row, Priya maintained a neutral expression, though the tension in her posture revealed her growing awareness that this would not be a generic leadership transition speech. As of this morning, we have implemented comprehensive system changes designed to restore balance to our information ecosystem and transparency to our recognition processes. These changes address three critical areas. First, access to information, based on actual role responsibilities rather than personal relationships. Second, transparent attribution of contributions that cannot be retroactively modified without documentation. And third, clear visibility into decision-making processes that affect project priorities and resource allocation. A ripple of reaction moved through the audience as employees processed the implications. For many, particularly those in technical roles who had experienced the systematic appropriation of their work, these changes represented long-desired corrections to fundamental inequities. Some of you have already noticed these changes as you logged in this morning. You may have discovered access to information that was previously unavailable to you despite being relevant to your work. You may have found that your historical contributions are now properly documented in project records. You may have gained visibility into strategic decisions that directly impact your responsibilities. I shifted focus slightly, addressing the concerns I knew would be emerging among those who had benefited from the previous arrangements. These changes are not punitive, they are corrective. They reflect a fundamental principle. In a truly innovative organization, value comes from what you create, not who you know. Advancement comes from impact, not influence. And leadership is demonstrated through enabling others, not controlling access. Dominic shifted uncomfortably in his seat, likely recognizing that his management approach was being directly challenged. Several of Priya's other lieutenants exchanged glances, their expressions revealing calculations about how to position themselves in this altered landscape. Practically speaking, these changes mean that starting today, all project contributions will be transparently tracked and credited to their actual creators. All promotion decisions will be based on documented impact rather than subjective assessments. All strategic priorities will be established through transparent processes rather than private arrangements. I moved toward the specific initiatives that would most directly address the damage done under previous leadership. Effective immediately, we are reinstating several critical projects that were previously sidelined despite their innovative potential. The accessibility framework that was developed to improve technology access for users with disabilities will now become a top company priority. The Nexus protocol for securing vulnerable populations' digital identities will receive full resource allocation. The ethical AI guidelines that were developed by Dr. Kwan's team will be implemented across all our development processes. Each of these projects represented direct reversals of Priya's decisions that had prioritized short-term commercial considerations over meaningful innovation. The mentioned project leaders sat straighter in their seats, expressions of cautious hope, replacing long-held resignation. Additionally, we will be conducting a comprehensive review of all personnel decisions made over the past 3 years, with particular attention to patterns of advancement, project assignment, and recognition distribution. Where we find inequities, we will implement appropriate corrections. This announcement generated the most visible reaction: nervous shifting among those who had benefited from favoritism, and attentive focus from those who had been systematically overlooked. I understand these changes will create adjustment challenges. Some established workflows will require modification. Some accustomed privileges will no longer exist. Some traditional influence channels will be replaced by transparent processes. These adjustments may feel disruptive initially, but they represent essential corrections to our operational foundations. I paused, acknowledging the magnitude of the transformation we were initiating. To support this transition, we've established dedicated resources to address questions, concerns, and implementation challenges. Maya Winters will lead our compliance team to ensure all changes meet legal and regulatory requirements. Raj Patel will oversee technical aspects of our system reconfiguration. Imani Washington will direct financial transparency initiatives, and I will hold open office hours every day this week to address your questions directly. As I move toward conclusion, I noticed Priya quietly leaving her seat, accompanied by Julian Mercer, who had evidently arrived during the presentation. Their departure before the meeting concluded sent a clear message about their response to these changes. Let me close with this. Lumen's greatest asset has always been the innovative capacity of its people, all its people, not just those with the right connections or titles. The changes we're implementing today are designed to unlock that capacity by ensuring everyone has appropriate access, proper attribution, and equal opportunity. I surveyed the room once more, noting the spectrum of responses, from enthusiastic engagement among those who had been marginalized to careful neutrality from those reassessing their position in the new order. Change is never easy, particularly when it disrupts established patterns and privileges. But necessary change is how we grow, how we improve, and ultimately how we fulfill our potential, both individually and as an organization. I look forward to building Lumen's next chapter, together with all of you. The applause that followed revealed the company's divisions. Genuine enthusiasm from the technical teams and other previously marginalized groups, polite participation from those still evaluating their position, and notable silence from Priya's closest allies. As employees began dispersing, the real work of transformation commenced. Throughout the day, our implementation teams addressed countless questions, resolved access issues, and facilitated the transition to new protocols. Meanwhile, Maya monitored the inevitable counteroffensive from Priya and her allies. Julian has called another emergency board meeting for 4 p.m., she reported during our midday briefing. The stated agenda is addressing operational disruption and unauthorized system changes. He's framing the restructuring as reckless and potentially damaging to client relationships. I nodded, having anticipated this exact response. And The client outreach? Mixed results so far, Maya acknowledged. Frost Dynamics and Meridian Systems have expressed support for the enhanced transparency. Archer Global and TechCore are reserving judgment pending more details. Vitex Partners, where Priya has her strongest personal relationship, has expressed serious concerns about continuity. Vitex is Julian's former company and Priya's original sponsor, I noted. Their reaction was predictable. What matters is preventing a cascade of client concerns that could justify board intervention. Our client engagement teams are implementing the specialized briefings as planned, Maya assured me. Early feedback suggests the transparency measures are actually reassuring to technical stakeholders, even if some executive contacts are expressing reservation. Throughout the afternoon, we maintained continuous monitoring of system access, patterns, communication channels, and external activities. Priya and her inner circle had established a temporary base in an off-site location, presumably to plan their response strategy without surveillance. Their absence created space for employees to explore the new information landscape without fear of observation or reprisal. The emergency board meeting convened virtually at 4 p.m., with all directors participating remotely, a format that reduced the emotional dynamics that had influenced the previous in-person session. Julian opened with a forceful statement portraying our changes as reckless and potentially damaging to company interests. These sweeping system modifications were implemented without proper vetting, appropriate change management, or consideration of client impact, he argued, his tone conveying professional concern rather than personal opposition. Multiple clients have expressed serious reservations about continuity of service and relationship management. I allowed him to complete his initial presentation before responding with our carefully prepared counter-argument. The restructuring addresses critical security vulnerabilities and compliance gaps that were identified during standard succession due diligence, I explained, framing the changes as routine governance rather than revolutionary upheaval. These vulnerabilities included unauthorized monitoring capabilities, selective access restrictions that impeded appropriate oversight, and attribution systems that allowed retroactive modification without documentation. Patricia Nouri, who had emerged as a key ally built upon this foundation. As audit committee chair, I would have expected these issues to be identified during regular security reviews. The fact that they persisted unaddressed raises serious questions about our previous compliance processes. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, with Julian and his allies attempting to characterize the changes as disruptive overreach, while our supporters emphasized governance responsibilities and security requirements. The turning point came when Maya presented documentation showing that several of the concerned clients Julian cited had actually expressed support for the enhanced transparency measures in direct communications with their technical teams. It appears there's a disconnect between executive relationship managers' characterization of client concerns and the client's actual feedback, Maya noted diplomatically, effectively undermining Julian's central argument without directly accusing him of misrepresentation. When the final vote came on Julian's motion to pause implementation of system changes pending comprehensive impact assessment, it failed 6-3, with even Martin Chen now aligning with our position. The board instead approved a modified resolution supporting continued implementation with enhanced communication to stakeholders and weekly status updates to directors. As the virtual meeting concluded, I received an urgent message from our security team. Priya had returned to the building and requested access to her office to collect personal belongings. Standard exit protocol, I directed. Security escort, documented inventory of removed items, and verification against personal property records. This standard procedure, which had been routinely bypassed for executives despite being company policy, would ensure that only genuine personal items were removed, not company information or assets. 30 minutes later, Maya reported the outcome. Priya refused the escort requirement and left without entering the building. She's now demanding that her belongings be packed and delivered to her home, supervised only by her personal assistant. A clear attempt to remove documents or devices without oversight. Denied, I responded immediately. Standard protocol applies to everyone regardless of position. Her belongings will remain secure until she complies with established procedures. This seemingly minor confrontation represented a critical message. The special exceptions and unwritten privileges that had defined executive culture under previous leadership no longer existed. Rules applied universally, not selectively based, on rank or relationship. By evening, the initial phase of our restructuring was largely complete. System access had been reconfigured according to legitimate role requirements. Attribution mechanisms were functioning as designed, recording and preserving contribution records. Financial transparency protocols were revealing the complex web of arrangements that had previously remained hidden from proper oversight. Most importantly, employee responses were trending increasingly positive as people discovered information previously withheld from them, received proper credit for work they had contributed, and gained visibility into decisions that affected their projects and careers. I was reviewing these implementation metrics when Garrett joined me in the command center, bringing coffee and a rare moment of reflection amid the operational intensity. "Initial assessment?" he asked, settling into a chair beside my workstation. "Better than projected," I replied. System changes are 94% complete with minimal disruption to core operations. Employee feedback is running 78% positive despite the adjustment challenges. Board opposition has been contained to the expected minority. Garrett nodded thoughtfully. "And Priya's counter-strategy?" "Evolving from system preservation to narrative control," I noted. "Having failed to maintain privileged access or secure board intervention, she's shifting to reputation management, positioning herself as the victim of unreasonable changes rather than the architect of the systems being corrected." "A predictable pivot," Garrett acknowledged. "She's always excelled at controlling external perceptions even when internal realities contradicted her narrative." I pulled up the monitoring dashboard showing external communications patterns. "She's reached out to 7 industry publications already, likely attempting to shape the public story about this transition. 3 financial analysts have requested comment on leadership instability at Lumen, suggesting coordinated outreach." "The external perception battle," Garrett mused. "It was always going to be part of this process. Priya built her career on carefully managed impressions rather than substantive results. Which is precisely why we prepared for it," I reminded him, opening our comprehensive media strategy developed months earlier. Transparency as both message and method. While she attempts to spin narratives through private channels, we'll simply make the actual data available to appropriate stakeholders. The following morning brought the first public manifestation of Priya's counter-strategy. An industry publication ran a feature questioning whether Lumen's abrupt leadership change signals instability in the company's direction. The piece quoted unnamed sources familiar with the situation, suggesting that my appointment represented prioritization of family connection over established leadership experience. Rather than engaging in a defensive response, we implemented our prepared transparency protocol. Maya conducted on-record briefings with key technology and business journalists, providing factual context about the transition planning process. Garrett gave a single comprehensive interview addressing both the succession decision and the governance improvements being implemented. Most effectively, we released authorized case studies documenting several innovation initiatives that had been suppressed under previous leadership, now being revitalized under the new structure. By mid-afternoon, the narrative was already shifting from controversial leadership change to systematic innovation renewal, as technology media focused on the substantial projects now receiving proper investment after years of neglect. Priya's attempt to portray herself as a victim of nepotism faced a fundamental challenge. The transparent attribution systems now revealed the systematic pattern of credit appropriation that had characterized her leadership. Journalists who investigated beyond superficial impressions discovered compelling evidence that her reported achievements often originated with others whose contributions had been obscured through selective information control. The most definitive shift in external perception came 3 days after our restructuring, when Dr. Eliza Kwan published her long-suppressed ethical analysis of Priya's flagship Elixir project. The comprehensive report, which had previously been blocked from circulation through selective access restrictions, documented how the premium service had been constructed by repurposing technologies originally designed to benefit vulnerable populations, redirecting them to serve wealthy clients instead. The ethical implications resonated beyond technology circles, generating broader discussions about responsibility and innovation and the importance of transparent development processes. Priya's attempts to dismiss the analysis as disgruntled employee criticism failed when multiple developers confirmed the accuracy of Dr. Kwan's documentation, supported by the newly accessible project records that tracked the evolution of these technologies. 1 week after the holiday gala that had initiated this transformation, I stood again at the windows of the executive office, now thoroughly reorganized to reflect a more collaborative approach to leadership. The view of Seattle's skyline remained the same, but the company occupying this building had fundamentally changed. In departments throughout Lumen, previously marginalized innovators were now leading revitalized projects. Employees whose contributions had been systematically appropriated were receiving proper recognition. Hidden financial arrangements were being unwound and replaced with transparent agreements. Most importantly, the culture of selective access and relationship-based advancement was giving way to merit-based recognition and contribution-focused evaluation. The transition remained challenging. Several of Priya's closest allies had resigned rather than adapt to an environment where special privileges no longer existed. A few clients, particularly those with personal connections to the previous leadership, had expressed ongoing concerns about relationship continuity. Julian Mercer continued attempting to undermine the changes through his remaining board influence, though his effectiveness diminished as the positive impact of the restructuring became increasingly evident. Maya joined me at the window, tablet in hand with the latest implementation metrics. Productivity indicators are up 23% across technical teams, she noted. Voluntary sharing of information has increased by 64%. And application volume has doubled since we published the restructured advancement criteria. What about the Nexus Protocol team? I asked, particularly concerned about the project closest to my own technical expertise, the security framework, designed to protect vulnerable users that had been repeatedly sidelined under Priya's leadership. Thriving, Maya confirmed with a smile. Mira Okafor has assembled an exceptional team now that developers aren't afraid of being associated with a deprioritized initiative. Initial testing shows the framework exceeding performance projections by 37%. I nodded, satisfaction mixing with a touch of vindication. The technologies that had been suppressed not for their lack of merit, but for their misalignment with certain executives' priorities, were finally receiving the resources and recognition they deserved. And our former leadership team? I asked, knowing that Priya and her inner circle were unlikely to accept their diminished influence without continued resistance. Priya has accepted a strategic advisor position with Vitex Partners, Maya reported, referencing the client with the strongest ties to Julian Mercer. Dominic and 3 others have followed her there. They're positioning it as pursuing exciting new opportunities rather than a coordinated departure. Predictable realignment, I observed. They'll maintain their network externally while attempting to preserve influence through client relationships. Which is why our relationship management restructuring is so important, Maya noted. With transparent documentation of all client interactions and team-based relationship models replacing individual gatekeeping, their external leverage is significantly reduced. A notification appeared on my calendar, time for the weekly all-company update that had replaced the carefully scripted executive pronouncements of the previous regime. These open sessions, where any employee could ask questions directly without filtering through management layers, represented perhaps the most visible symbol of our cultural transformation. As I prepared to leave for the auditorium, I paused at the small display case near the door, now containing my grandmother's hand-carved wooden box that had traveled with her from Mexico when she immigrated decades earlier. Inside was a simple handwritten note she had given me when I graduated from MIT. Leadership is not about being in charge. It is about taking care of those in your charge. That fundamental principle, so often overlooked in corporate environments, focused on power and control, had guided my 3-year journey from overlooked developer to transformational leader. Not seeking authority for its own sake, but acquiring the necessary position to create an environment where everyone could contribute to their full potential without artificial barriers or selective recognition. The holiday gala that had shocked Seattle's tech community with its dramatic revelation now seemed like a distant memory, though barely a week had passed. The moment when Garrett had called me to the stage while I held a champagne tray, exposing my true identity to those who had systematically undermined me, had been merely the visible manifestation of a transformation years in the planning. As I headed toward the auditorium filled with employees energized by newfound possibilities rather than constrained by hidden boundaries, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The path forward would undoubtedly contain further challenges as entrenched systems resisted change and established interests protected their advantages. But the foundation had been irrevocably altered, replacing selective privilege with transparent opportunity, relationship-based advancement with merit-based recognition, and controlled information with accessible knowledge. The company where they had once made me serve drinks while others claimed credit for my innovations was now becoming the organization my uncle had originally envisioned. One where contribution mattered more than connection, where substance outweighed spectacle, and where leadership meant enabling others rather than controlling them. The true transformation was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.